Welcome to Channel Unveiling Mysteries. Anatahan Island, located about 177 kilometers north of Saipan Island, is a small island in the Mariana Islands in the Pacific Ocean. During World War II, 32 Japanese men and one Japanese woman were stranded on this island for 6 years. They had 2 guns, and a series of absurd stories unfolded involving the island's sole woman, leading to multiple deaths, and ultimately, only the woman survived. Of the 32 men, only 19 remained. So, what happened on that desolate island? You are watching the Anatahan Island Massacre, a story of a woman living on a deserted island with 32 men, brought to you by Unsolved True Crime. And as usual, before we delve into the main content, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to encourage us and to stay updated on the latest thrilling and fascinating cases. In 1939, encouraged by domestic policies, many Japanese citizens migrated to islands occupied by Japan to work and live. Kayuko Higa, only 16 years old, was one of them. She traveled a long way from Okinawa, Japan, to Saipan Island. The purpose of this trip was to find refuge with her brother. Not long after, she found a job as a waitress at a cafe. Young and beautiful, Kayuko attracted the admiration of many young men. One of them was a young man from Okinawa, Shoichi Higa. He was fortunate enough to pursue Kayuko, and after a period of dating, when Kayuko was 18, they got married. Due to Japan's small land area, the Japanese government began to migrate and occupy many islands in the Pacific. Shoichi's main job was to supervise the labor of some workers on an island. At this time, Kayuko's married life was very happy. In 1944, Shoichi's job changed. He was transferred to Anatahan Island and brought his wife, Kayuko, with him. Anatahan Island is located about 177 kilometers north of Saipan Island. This small, oval-shaped island is about 9 kilometers long and 3.7 kilometers wide, with an area of nearly 32 kilometers. The island has a volcano about 790 meters high. There were also many large coconut plantations that once thrived, but later declined after being ravaged by storms. At that time, only about 20 local residents still worked there. Shoichi's job was to manage and supervise them. Not long after they arrived on Anatahan Island, World War II was gradually coming to an end. It can be said that Japan was losing ground in the battles. It was a disastrous defeat on the Pacific battlefield. Many islands initially occupied by Japan were gradually recaptured by the US military. At this time, Shoichi thought about his sister, who was still on a nearby island. Worried about his sister's safety, he left Anatahan Island to visit her. No one expected that he would leave and never return. At this point, only a few local residents remained on the island. Among the Japanese, only Kayuko and Shoichi's boss, Kikuichiro, were left. Under such harsh conditions, the two became close and quickly began living together. They started life as a couple. Unfortunately, the peace on Anatahan Island couldn't last forever. Not long after, the island was also bombed by the US military. Kayuko and Kikuichiro managed to survive by living in the dense jungle in the middle of the island. However, after such a bombing, the plantations on the island were completely destroyed, and almost all daily necessities and supplies were burned. They also lost all contact with the outside world, and Anatahan truly became an isolated island. Fortunately, the 40 pigs and 20 chickens they raised also survived the conflict, providing a means for them to subsist. However, the world of just 2 people did not last long. Something unexpected happened on June 12, 1944. 4 fishing boats were attacked by the US military near Anatahan Island. 3 of the boats sank, and the remaining one was severely damaged and sank shortly after. Many crew members died, but since one boat sank not far from Anatahan Island, the survivors tried to swim towards it. Eventually, 31 men successfully swam to the island. 10 of them were Japanese naval personnel, and the remaining 21 were ordinary sailors. All were young men, the youngest being only 16 years old. With no boats left, they had no way to leave and could only temporarily live on this island, relying on wild bananas and coconuts to stave off hunger. At first, these 31 men thought it was a desolate, uninhabited island, cut off from the outside world. Until one day, while foraging for wild fruit, they encountered Kayuko and Kikuchiro. Having lived in a world with only 2 people for some time, Kayuko and Kikuchiro were delighted to see so many new arrivals. After all, besides themselves, all the other Japanese on the island were locals, making communication difficult. With the sudden arrival of many Japanese, it was like meeting compatriots again. The married couple, Kayuko and Kikuchiro, enthusiastically helped them, sharing their food and treating their wounds. Initially, the 31 survivors were divided into small groups and lived in different areas. However, everyone eventually became acquainted and lived together, including Kayuko and Kikuchiro. As the number of people increased, the first issue to address was food and clothing. Before long, they had eaten all the pigs and chickens on the island, leaving only wild fruits and seafood like crabs to prevent starvation. After securing enough food, they even learned to make alcohol from coconuts, enjoying life according to human instinct. Food was no longer a problem, and clothing was also easily managed. They initially had clothes, but after a long time they became ragged, so they used tree bark and other crude materials to cover their bodies. For over a year, the 33 people on the island lived in peace, until August 15, 1945, when Japan completely surrendered and declared defeat. However, the people on this isolated island were unaware. Later, the U.S. military conveyed this news to the remaining inhabitants, but they didn't believe it, considering it an American conspiracy and refusing to leave the island. Nevertheless, the indigenous people on the island gradually left, leaving only the 33 Japanese, isolated from the world. At this point, their seemingly peaceful life began to change. The extreme imbalance in the male-to-female ratio caused most of the men to view Kayuko differently. After all, they were all young men full of vitality. The unusual atmosphere became increasingly serious, and if not stopped, disorder was bound to occur. Therefore, some intelligent and kind-hearted individuals among them suggested that Kayuko and Kikuchiro hold a wedding in front of everyone. The purpose was to let everyone know that Kayuko was taken and to deter others. After the wedding, the two left the crowd and lived independently. This was effective, and life on the island returned to its expected tranquility. However, it wasn't long before the peaceful life was shattered once more. In August 1946, the wreckage of an American bomber was discovered on the island. Among the debris were many useful items such as parachutes that could be fashioned into clothing. Additionally, they found 4 damaged pistols and 90 rounds of ammunition. As you know, there were former soldiers on the island who were skilled in using guns, and eventually, 2 of the 4 broken pistols were repaired. Now, equal life was no more on this isolated island. Whoever had the gun held the power. Guns became symbols of authority. Whoever had power could order others around. The appearance of these 2 guns completely changed the fate of the 33 people on the island. First, let's call the 2 men who repaired the guns Yamamoto and Yamagi. They immediately became the rulers of the group, and as rulers, They wanted the best things for themselves. What they wanted most on this island, without a doubt, was Kayuko Higa. The two men used their guns to force Kayuko and her husband to submit. Under the pressure of power, Kayuko could do nothing but silently endure. However, things were not that simple. Not long after, the first death occurred on the island. A man fell from a coconut tree and died. Yamamoto and Yamagi were the only witnesses. Coincidentally, the deceased had previously had a conflict with Yamamoto and the others. This made everyone suspect that his death was related to Yamamoto and Yamagi. This caused those without guns to worry about their safety. Yamamoto, however, did not care and became even more arrogant. Another man who dared to covet Kayuko was also shot by them. This act panicked the others even more. They worried that they would be next. At this point, everyone's focus was no longer on Kayuko, but on these two guns. The atmosphere on the island became tense and oppressive. If anyone was most afraid at this moment, it was certainly Kayuko's husband, Kikuichiro. He had to live every day under the supervision of Yamamoto and Yamagi, knowing that if they were displeased, they would eliminate him immediately. Therefore, Kikuichiro came up with a plan. He went to Yamamoto and Yamagi and told them that he would no longer live with Kayuko and would leave her to them. Yamamoto and Yamagi were delighted, praising Kikuichiro as intelligent, but no one knew it was his plan. There's a saying, outsiders see more clearly. Faced with this situation, Kayuko saw it clearly, like an outsider. Previously, both Yamamoto and Yamagi had guns, so they were united in suppressing outsiders. Now, both simultaneously possessed Kayuko without a third party involved. Due to human instinct, they would certainly develop the desire to possess Kayuko for themselves. This would increase the conflict between them, and perhaps one day they would become enemies. Indeed, not long after, Yamamoto and Yamagi fiercely contended for Kayuko. After the struggle, Yamagi emerged victorious. In this way, Yamagi not only acquired the only woman on the island, but also possessed both guns, symbols of power. This made everyone uncomfortable and disgusted. When the dominance and monopoly of the strong become too obvious, the weak will, of course, retaliate. Yamagi still thought that his happy days had arrived. He could become the reigning emperor here. However, not long after, Yamagi suddenly died. Everyone said he fell into the sea and drowned, but in reality everyone knew the true cause of his death. No one just spoke out, and so, Yamagi's two guns fell into the hands of two other men, Nakagawa and Iwai. They immediately claimed Kayuko. She was forced to serve these two men again. This scene was so familiar. Again, two men with guns simultaneously claimed Kayuko, and like before, Yamagi and Yamamoto had done the same, but ultimately with no good outcome. Outsiders could clearly see that everything would repeat, but those involved could not. Life on the island was peaceful for little more than a month before trouble broke out again. A conflict erupted between Nakagawa and Iwai. After another struggle, Iwai was the victor, and now the two guns on the island were once again in the hands of one person. And as before, he alone possessed Kayuko. The situation was now exactly like the previous time, but Iwai had learned from the earlier lesson. He was very careful and cautious in his daily life, fearing that someone would eliminate him at any moment. And so, Iwai spent 2 years smoothly. But it seemed fate had decreed otherwise. 2 years later, Iwai was assassinated. In the next few years, the deadly fog continued to cover Anatahan Island. 3 more people died on the island from various accidents. In total, 9 people had passed away. Everyone didn't say it out loud, but deep down they knew that they must have all died from gunshots. So the remaining people decided to sit down and discuss how to solve this problem. After discussions, the agreed-upon conclusion was that the two guns were the main cause, and to end the fear and anxiety, they devised a plan. Kayuko would choose someone to marry, and then the two guns would be thrown into the sea. This way, there would be no more weapons representing power, and Kayuko would belong to someone, so no one else would need to worry. Sounds like a reasonable plan, doesn't it? So everyone agreed and followed it. But would this truly solve the fundamental problem? In reality, it didn't. In the following days, 4 more strange deaths and disappearances occurred on the island. The two guns had clearly been thrown into the sea, so why were people still encountering misfortune? At this point, everyone on the island was worried about their own safety. In just 5 short years, from an initial 32 men, only 19 remained. To prevent this situation from escalating, everyone was forced to sit down and hold another meeting. After the second round of discussions, the conclusion this time was that the assassinations were driven by greed. Since the guns, which represented power, were gone, it could only be greed for the woman that led to such a situation. Finally, they made a bold decision to eliminate Kayuko. Only this could extinguish everyone's desires, and life on the island could return to peace. Having reached a consensus, they decided to eliminate Kayuko the next day. But that evening, a man who deeply loved Kayuko revealed this information to her. Upon hearing the news, her face turned pale, and she spent the entire night trying to hide in the jungle. Driven by her survival instinct, Kayuko managed to live day by day in the island's crevices. This island, with an area of nearly 32 square kilometers, was covered in dense jungle, so it wasn't easy for the men to find Kayuko quickly. In June 1950, on Kayuko's 33rd day in hiding, she was surprised to discover an American warship anchored off the coast. Kayuko immediately climbed a tree, removed her clothing, and waved and shouted loudly. Kayuko's actions attracted the attention of the US military, and she was rescued. Finally, she escaped from this gloomy island. After hearing that there were still survivors and notifying their families, the families of those who refused to leave the island began to write letters, informing them that the war had ended and they could return home quickly. Soon after, over 200 letters were sent to the island. However, the people on the island still insisted that it was a trap set by the US military and continued to refuse to leave. On June 26, 1951, a man on the island became convinced that the letter he received was specially crafted by his wife. Therefore, he believed what the US military said was true. Finally, he persuaded the others on the island to accept the reality that they had been defeated, and then they surrendered to the US military and were rescued from the island. These individuals were first taken to a US military base in Guam and then returned to Japan. Since they had been missing for many years, everyone assumed they had been sacrificed in the war. Therefore, upon their return, many of their wives had remarried, and even Kayuko's former husband, Shoichi Higa, had a happy new marriage. When asked by the media about the whereabouts of the 13 men who did not return, the survivors' testimonies were inconsistent. This led everyone to suspect, and the truth was only revealed when one person faced immense pressure and could no longer conceal it. Subsequently, the media reported that these men had caused a massacre while fighting over one woman. Extensive reports made Kayuko Higa unexpectedly the center of public attention and famous in Japanese society. The media gave Kayuko many nicknames: Queen of Anatahan Island, the woman with 32 faces, the princess who charms men, and so on. Although some media outlets expressed sympathy for Kayuko, noting she had no choice but to live in such circumstances, forced to endure humiliation and compromise, the majority of the media still showed contempt and condemned Kayuko. The Kayuko incident became a controversial topic in Japanese society at that time. Later, Kayuko was invited to star in the play Anatahan Island. From 1952, she toured the country for 2 years. In 1953, the story that occurred on Anatahan Island was adapted into a film titled This is the Truth of Anatahan Island. The film recreated a part of Kayuko Higa's true story, and she also played her own role in the film. Her acting career lasted for a few years, but Kayuko could not continue down this path. And finally, to make a living, Kayuko worked as a dancer in Tokyo. When Kayuko was 34, she remarried. After that, she and her husband opened a small shop and began a new, simple life. However, unfortunately, their happy days did not last long. Kayuko lost her husband when she was over 40. In March 1974, Kayuko passed away from a brain tumor at approximately 50 years old, ending her challenging life. The Anatahan Island Incident, though confined to a small island, reflects common societal issues. When human morality loses the constraints of law, primitive survival instincts are reactivated. Driven by this shared environment, it becomes very difficult for the animal or human part within each individual to be decided by themselves. Only the victors have the right to speak at that time. On the island, the competition was about strength. Whoever had a gun held the power. Today's struggles have shifted from strength to money and beauty. As a line from a novel once said, "Fish that climb ashore are no longer fish." The people on Anatahan Island were isolated from human society, and perhaps we can no longer truly call them human. Some argue that the appearance of 2 guns and a single woman was the cause of this tragedy. However, this is not the case. The guns were merely a spark. The true cause was human desire. The nature of humanity is often unable to withstand tests. The presence of the sole woman on the island and the guns were simply catalysts that accelerated the subsequent disputes. Later, the islanders criticized Kayuko, claiming she brought a deadly and horrifying atmosphere to the island. They even intended to harm her. But did they ever consider whether the outcome would have changed if each person could control their desires? As for Kayuko, she clearly deserves our sympathy, doesn't she? Even after the event, some media outlets still criticized her. In reality, she was a weak person under the force of power and violence. She truly had no other choice but to accept and submit. Some might ask why Kayuko did not get pregnant after living on the island for many years. On this matter, after research, there are many related articles, but no reasonable explanation has been given. It is also possible that she had an unwanted pregnancy and subsequently miscarried, leading to infertility. Afterwards, Kayuko took on several jobs upon her return to Japan. This was not ideal, but she received extensive media coverage and became a well-known name. Most of it consisted of negative evaluations, and to continue to survive in these circumstances, did she have another choice? This incident clearly demonstrates the frightening nature of human hearts, which may be why rules, laws, and other societal structures emerged. These not only protect certain vulnerable groups, but, more importantly, maintain balance in society. What about you? What do you think about the story on Anatahan Island? What do you think about our girl Kayuko? Does she deserve such negative evaluations? Please leave your opinions in the comment section below. We will discuss them together. Don't forget to subscribe to the Unveiling Mysteries channel to always receive the latest videos that help you achieve success in life. Thank you for following and accompanying the channel.